This is the story of what happened on the evening of May 14th at Aura, a Michelin-starred bistro in the city's affluent North District. It involves a family, a police officer, and a complaint that should have been dismissed as trivial. Dr. Alastair Finch, his wife Eleanor, and their daughter Simone were celebrating a milestone. Officer Kalin, badge number 734, was dispatched to handle a disturbance call. The accusation was simple. The officer, acting on a racially motivated complaint, unlawfully and violently removed the Finch family from the establishment, violating their civil rights and inflicting profound emotional distress. What began as a quiet family dinner ended with flashing lights, a federal lawsuit, and a city's reckoning with the armed agent of its prejudice. The scene opens not with shouting, but with the gentle clink of silverware on porcelain. Aura was a temple of modern cuisine, a space of muted grays, soft lighting, and hushed reverence. For the Finch family, it was a rare island of tranquility. Simone, her eyes bright with a future she had fought for, had just been accepted into the Johns Hopkins neurosurgery program. Her acceptance letter sat, a folded piece of Holy Writ, beside her father's wine glass. Alastair Finch watched his daughter, a man whose life was a testament to measured calm in the face of systemic storms. He was dressed in a simple navy blue sweater and dark trousers, an outfit that spoke of comfort, not of the immense power he wielded in federal courtrooms. He was a lion in a lamb's clothing, his quiet demeanor a carefully constructed fortress around a mind that could dismantle legal arguments with surgical precision. Eleanor, an art historian, radiated a warmth that filled their small booth, her laughter a soft melody against the restaurant's ambient hum. They were a portrait of black excellence and joy, a picture that, in certain eyes, was an act of provocation. 2 tables away, a white couple, the Chadwicks, watched them. Their gazes weren't curious. They were possessive, as if the Finches were trespassing on their exclusive territory of quiet, expensive dining. Mrs. Chadwick's lips were a thin, disapproving line. She leaned over to her husband, her whisper a venomous dart across the space. The Finches' laughter, which was no louder than any other table's, seemed to physically offend her. She flagged down the maitre d', a young, nervous man named Julian. Her complaint was vague but loaded. "That table," she said, nodding toward the Finches, "is being awfully loud. It's disruptive. They're making us uncomfortable." The accusation hung in the air, thick and odious. Uncomfortable. It was the sanitized, modern-day lexicon for racial animus. Julian the maitre d' was caught. He saw a black family quietly celebrating. He saw a wealthy, established white patron demanding action. He chose the path of least resistance, a decision that would unravel his career and his restaurant's reputation. He approached the Finch's table, his posture an apology in itself. "Excuse me," he began, his voice barely audible. "I'm terribly sorry, but we've had a complaint about the noise level." Alastair didn't even look toward the Chadwicks. He knew. He had felt their eyes on his family all evening. He gave the maitre d' a small, understanding smile that did not reach his eyes. "I assure you, we had no intention of disturbing anyone," Alastair said, his voice calm and even. "My daughter just received some wonderful news. We'll be more mindful." Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Simone's smile faltered, the joy of her achievement suddenly tainted by the familiar chill of being policed in public spaces. The maitre d' scurried away, but the damage was done. The Chadwicks weren't satisfied. For them, the family's very presence was the disturbance. Mrs. Chadwick signaled for Julian again, this time with more force. "They're still here," she hissed. "I want them gone. If you don't handle this, I will post a review that will sink this place." Fear, potent and immediate, seized the young manager. He saw his livelihood, the restaurant's precious star, all threatened by a woman whose husband likely sat on a dozen influential boards. In a moment of catastrophic cowardice, he retreated to his office and dialed the police non-emergency line. "There's a group here," he told the dispatcher, his voice trembling, refusing to be quiet. "They're becoming aggressive." He omitted the race of the family. He didn't have to. The system he was activating was already primed for the information. 10 minutes later, Officer Kalin walked through the door. His presence instantly fractured the restaurant's serene atmosphere. He was a man built of broad shoulders and rigid certainty, his uniform crisp, his jaw set. The timestamp on his bodycam footage read 8:47 p.m. He didn't stop at the maitre d' stand to get the story. He didn't scan the room to assess the situation. His eyes, guided by an internal compass of bias, landed directly on the only black family in the dining room. He strode toward their table, his heavy boots silencing all remaining conversation. His hand rested casually, almost possessively, on the grip of his service weapon. The air crackled with tension. Every diner, every waiter, froze. The soft symphony of the restaurant had been replaced by the brutalist solo of a cop with an agenda. "Folks," Kalen said, his voice a percussive boom in the quiet room. He didn't address them as sir or ma'am. It was the dismissive, generic folks used for crowds and problems. "You're causing a disturbance. I'm going to need you to pay your bill and leave." Alistair placed his napkin deliberately on the table. He looked up at the officer, his expression unreadable. He had been in this play before. He knew all the lines. "Officer," he began, his tone respectful but firm, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. What disturbance are we causing?" Kalen gestured vaguely with his thumb toward the front of the restaurant. "Management wants you out. That's all you need to know." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice tight with indignation. "We were just having a celebratory dinner for our daughter. We did absolutely nothing wrong. I don't need the life story." Kalen snapped, his patience, already a shallow commodity, evaporating. His eyes were cold, devoid of curiosity or empathy. He was not there to de-escalate. He was there to enforce an eviction he had already deemed justified. "I'm telling you to leave. Out." Now the finality of his command was a slap in the face. The entire restaurant was now a silent theater, the patrons a captive audience. In the periphery, the faint red glow of a recording phone appeared, then another. The shocked bystanders were becoming silent cameras, their lenses capturing the raw, unfolding injustice. Simone, who had faced down organic chemistry and the MCAT with unblinking courage, now looked small, her triumph dissolving into fear. This was a different kind of test, one for which no amount of studying could prepare her. Alistair held the officer's gaze. He was no longer just a father celebrating. He was an advocate, a defender, standing on a precipice he knew all too well. "Officer," he said, his voice dropping slightly, taking on the precise, measured cadence he used in court. "We are paying customers on private property with an implied license to be here. To be asked to leave without cause is one thing. To be ordered to leave by a law enforcement officer under threat of force requires a legal basis. So I will ask you again, what crime are we suspected of committing?" Kalen's lips curled into a sneer. He was not used to being questioned, especially not by someone he had already categorized as a subordinate. "The crime is going to be trespassing if you don't get your feet moving in the next 10 seconds. The manager wants you gone. That makes you trespassers. It's simple. Now, are you going to walk out on your own, or do I have to help you?" The threat was naked, brutal. He took a half-step closer, invading their personal space, using his physical size as a tool of intimidation. He was the hammer, and in his world, every problem looked like a nail. The other diners watched, a mixture of horror and fascination on their faces. Julian, the maitre d', hovered near the kitchen door, his face ashen. He had unleashed a force he could not control. Mrs. Chadwick watched with a look of smug satisfaction. This was order being restored. This was the world being put back in its proper alignment. But Alistair Finch was not a nail. He was a bedrock of jurisprudence. He slowly rose from his seat, not in compliance, but to meet the threat on his own terms. He was taller than Kalen, a fact that seemed to momentarily surprise the officer. Alistair positioned himself slightly in front of his wife and daughter, a subtle, protective shield. "Officer, your understanding of trespass law as it pertains to places of public accommodation seems to be incomplete," Alistair stated, his voice dangerously calm. "Under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this establishment cannot refuse us service or have us removed based on our race. A complaint from another patron, if motivated by racial animus, is not a valid cause for removal. It is, in fact, evidence of discrimination. By acting as the enforcement arm of that discrimination, you are making yourself and your department a party to a federal civil rights violation." Kalen's face flushed with anger. The legal terminology, the calm recitation of federal law, was an infuriating challenge to his authority. "Oh, We got a lawyer here, do we? He mocked, his voice dripping with condescension. You can save the fancy words for your public defender. I gave you a lawful order. You are refusing to comply. That's resisting. And I've had enough of this. He reached out and grabbed Alistair's arm. The fabric of the sweater bunched under his tight grip. The body cam footage, which had been relatively stable, suddenly lurched. Simone let out a small, terrified cry. Get your hands off my husband, Eleanor exclaimed, rising from her seat. Kaelin ignored her. He was focused on Alistair, on breaking this man's infuriating composure. I warned you, he snarled, yanking Alistair toward the aisle. You brought this on yourself. The sheer physicality of the act sent a shockwave through the room. A few patrons gasped. The number of recording phones multiplied. Alistair didn't struggle or pull away. To resist would be to give the officer the justification he desperately wanted. Instead, he allowed himself to be manhandled, his feet shuffling on the polished floor as Kaelin propelled him toward the restaurant's glass entrance. Every step was a new entry in the litany of violations being committed against him. Unlawful seizure, battery, false imprisonment under color of law. He was cataloging it all, his legal mind working with cold, terrifying clarity even as the humiliation of the moment washed over him. Pinned against the cold glass of the front door, with the officer's face inches from his, Alistair Finch finally decided the lesson was over. It was time for the final exam. He stopped cataloging and started speaking, his voice no longer calm but forged from ice and steel. Officer Kaelin, he said, his eyes locking onto the officer's nameplate. Badge number 734. You have just committed felony battery against me. You have done so in your official capacity, which elevates the crime. You have also, as I previously stated, actively participated in the violation of my family's civil rights under Title II of the Civil Rights Act. Your actions are not just department policy violations. They are federal offenses. Kaelin let out a short, derisive laugh, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. You got a big mouth, buddy. Who the hell do you think you are? It was the question he had been waiting for. The bitter, ironic climax to this humiliating drama. Alistair's voice was low, precise, and carried the weight of the entire federal judicial system. I am Dr. Alistair Finch, he paused, letting the name hang in the air. I am the Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. The title landed in the silent restaurant with the force of a physical blow. Officer Kaelin's smirk didn't just fade, it collapsed. The aggressive posture, the puffed-out chest, all of it seemed to deflate in an instant. His grip on Alistair's arm loosened. My credentials, including my federal identification and my Supreme Court bar card, are in the front right pocket of my trousers, Alistair continued, his voice relentless. I strongly suggest you retrieve them. I also suggest you contact your supervisor and the city attorney immediately. You will need to inform them that you have just illegally detained a senior official from the very department that investigates and prosecutes police misconduct. A collective gasp went through the room. Julian, the maitre d', looked like he was about to faint. Mrs. Chadwick's face, once smug, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She and her husband were frantically trying to get their check, to become invisible. But it was too late. Everyone was watching them. Everyone knew. Kaelin, moving as if in a trance, his movements clumsy and robotic, reached into Alistair's pocket. His hand trembled as he pulled out the leather wallet. He flipped it open. The first thing he saw was the gleaming, holographic seal of the Department of Justice on a government ID, right next to Alistair's calm, professional photograph. Below it, another card, this one cream-colored with an embossed golden eagle, admitted to the bar of the Supreme Court of the United States. The blood drained from Kaelin's face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. He dropped the wallet as if it had burned him. He let go of Alistair's arm completely. Sir, he stammered, the word foreign and choked in his throat. Sir, I didn't know. There was a complaint. They said the complaint was pretext. Alistair cut him off, his voice devoid of any emotion except a chilling finality. He bent down, retrieved his wallet, and tucked it back into his pocket. He smoothed the front of his sweater, a simple gesture that reclaimed all the dignity that had been stripped from him. The complaint was an expression of racial bias, and you, officer, were its willing and enthusiastic instrument. You saw a black family, and you saw a problem to be removed. You didn't investigate. You didn't question. You escalated. You assaulted. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the silent, recording phones. And now, it's all on camera. He looked back at the petrified officer. I want your supervisor on site. Now, I want a copy of the dispatch call, and you will preserve every single frame of your body camera footage. It is now Exhibit A in the federal lawsuit that will be filed against you, personally, for punitive damages, and against the city name, police department for systemic failure, negligent training, and unconstitutional practices. Is that understood? Kalen could only nod, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. He fumbled for his radio, his hand shaking so badly he could barely press the button. Dispatch. I need a supervisor at my location. Immediately, the request was thick with panic. The next 15 minutes were a blur of frantic activity. The supervisor, a portly sergeant with weary eyes, arrived on the scene. His face went from confusion to abject horror as he was briefed on the situation and saw the credentials Alistair presented. He began apologizing profusely, stumbling over his words, promising a full and immediate internal investigation. Alistair held up a hand, silencing him. Sergeant, your apologies are noted, but they are insufficient. This is no longer an internal matter. This is a federal matter. The Chadwicks, who had been trying to pay and escape, were stopped by other diners who pointed them out to the supervisor. They're the ones who started it, a woman called out. They lied. The couple was now being filmed by a dozen phones, their faces a mixture of fury and fear. They were no longer the arbiters of the space. They were defendants in the court of public opinion. Julian, the maitre d', was fired on the spot by the restaurant's owner, who had been called and arrived in a panic. He offered the Finch family a lifetime of free meals, an offer so absurdly inadequate that Alistair simply ignored it. Eleanor and Simone stood by Alistair's side, no longer victims, but witnesses to a seismic shift in power. Simone looked at her father, not with fear, but with a profound, overwhelming sense of awe. She had always known he was brilliant, but she had never seen the full, devastating force of his authority unleashed. In the days that followed, the story exploded. The multiple cell phone videos, combined with the official bodycam footage released under public pressure, went viral. The hashtag Justice for Finch trended for a week. The narrative was undeniable. A calm, dignified black family had been subjected to racist harassment, and the responding officer had acted as a violent enforcer of that bigotry. Officer Kalen was suspended without pay, and within a month, following a swift internal affairs investigation spurred by the threat of DOJ oversight, he was fired. The police union filed a grievance, but dropped it after their own lawyers reviewed the footage and Alistair's credentials. The Finch family, represented by one of the nation's top civil rights firms working pro bono, filed a $14 million lawsuit against the city. The complaint was a masterwork of legal writing, detailing not just the events of that night, but a documented pattern of racial bias within the department. It cited Kalen's own record, which included 5 prior complaints of excessive force, all of them against minority individuals, all of them dismissed internally. Aura, the Bistro, never recovered. Despite a flood of public apologies, diversity training initiatives, and the firing of the manager, the stain of the incident was indelible. Boycotts organized on social media crippled their business. 6 months later, the Michelin-starred restaurant closed its doors for good. The Chadwicks became local pariahs, their names and faces plastered across social media. They issued a weak, lawyer-vetted statement about a misunderstanding, which only fueled the public's contempt. The lawsuit settled out of court. The city, facing a legal battle against the Justice Department's own deputy director, knew it stood no chance. They agreed to a settlement of $87 million, one of the largest in the city's history. They also agreed to a consent decree, a federally monitored reform program to overhaul their use of force policies, bias training, and complaint procedures. At the press conference announcing the settlement, Alistair Finch stood before the cameras, his family beside him. He looked tired but resolute. This was never about the money, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. This was about accountability. My family was fortunate. I had the knowledge, the credentials, and the platform to fight back. But what happened to us happens every single day to black and brown people in this country who do not. They are humiliated, assaulted, and arrested, their lives ruined. simply for existing in a space where someone else feels they do not belong. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing. Their stories are not always filmed. They do not always have a federal ID card in their pocket. This settlement, this consent decree, is not just for the Finch family. It is for every single person who has been unjustly targeted and had their dignity stripped away by those sworn to protect them. The price of prejudice must be made so high that the system can no longer afford to pay it. Our work is not done. It is just beginning. The camera flashes illuminated his face, the face of a man who had taken a moment of profound personal violation and forged it into a weapon for systemic change, ensuring that the echoes of that ugly night in a quiet bistro would resonate in the halls of power for years to come.